The silence in the boardroom wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the silence of 12 executives watching their company bleed money in real time, watching their CEO stand at the head of the table with an engineer's report that might as well have been a death sentence, and knowing that not one of them had an answer that would change what was about to happen. Nathaniel Bishop set the report down with the kind of control that comes from years of refusing to let anyone see him flinch. "The fabrication line is down," he said. "Complete hydraulic failure on the primary press. The engineer says the entire system needs to be replaced. Custom parts, full tear down, 6-week lead time." He paused. $500,000. No one spoke. "We have the Meridian contract due in 4 weeks. If we miss that deadline, we lose the contract. If we lose the contract, we lose the credibility we've spent 2 years building in this sector." His voice was steady, but everyone in the room could hear what he wasn't saying. "This could end us." The CFO, a careful man named Martin Rees, cleared his throat. "Do we have any other options? I've called every fabrication specialist in a 2-state radius. They all say the same thing," Nathaniel said. "The hydraulic manifold is obsolete. The only option is a full system replacement." He looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn, giving them one last chance to offer something, anything that resembled a solution. Nothing came. "Meeting adjourned," he said. "I'll make the call to Meridian this afternoon." The room emptied in silence. What no one in that boardroom knew, what Nathaniel himself wouldn't know for another 72 hours, was that the answer to their $500,000 problem was currently mopping the hallway outside the executive offices, wearing a gray maintenance uniform, and thinking about whether he had enough in his account to cover his daughter's field trip fee. But that knowledge was still 3 days away, and the path to it would begin with a conversation Nathaniel Bishop never intended to have. 48 hours before the boardroom meeting, Jack Miller had been standing in the nurse's office at Riverside Elementary, watching his daughter Sophie sit on the vinyl exam table with an ice pack pressed to her wrist. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark curls that never stayed in the ponytail he attempted each morning, and eyes that processed the world with an unsettling degree of perception. "I'm fine, Dad," she said for the 3rd time. "The nurse called me at work, so clearly someone thought you weren't fine." The nurse, a kind woman named Mrs. Pacheco, gave him an apologetic look. "She fell during recess. I don't think it's serious, but given her condition—" "I know," Jack said quietly. "I know." Sophie had juvenile arthritis, diagnosed at 5. Most days were manageable. Some days weren't. The medication helped, but it was expensive, and the insurance covered less of it each year. And Jack had become very, very good at doing math in his head while standing in pharmacy lines. He signed a release form. He carried her backpack. They walked to his car, a 2004 sedan that had been reliable in the way that old things are reliable when you learn to listen to them carefully. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "A little." He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was already reading a book she'd pulled from her backpack, her face serious and absorbed. She had learned early not to complain. He wasn't sure whether to be proud of that or heartbroken by it. He dropped her at his mother's house. Margaret lived 6 blocks from the school and had a schedule flexible enough to be Jack's entire support system, and drove back to Bishop Manufacturing. He'd been working there for 14 months. Maintenance and custodial services, 2nd shift, which meant he could be home in the mornings when Sophie needed him and still pull 40 hours a week. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady, and steady mattered more than almost anything else. He parked in the employee lot. He badged in through the side entrance. He checked the schedule posted near the service closet and saw that he was assigned to the executive wing tonight, which was fine. The executive wing was always empty by the time his shift started, which meant he could work in silence and think about other things. Except tonight, the lights were still on. He pushed his cart past the conference room and saw him through the glass. Nathaniel Bishop, CEO, founder, the man whose name was on the building. He was alone at the head of the long table, staring at a stack of papers like they'd personally betrayed him. Jack had seen him before, of course everyone had. He moved through the building with the kind of presence that made people straighten their posture without realizing they were doing it. He was in his late 40s, tall, composed, the kind of person who seemed to operate on a frequency most people couldn't quite access. Jack kept walking, but as he passed, he heard something that made him stop. A sound. Quiet, brief, but unmistakable. Nathaniel Bishop was crying. Jack stood in the hallway for a long moment, his hands still on the handle of the cleaning cart, trying to decide whether what he'd heard was real, or whether exhaustion had turned ordinary sound into something it wasn't. Then he heard it again. Not loud, not dramatic, just the small, contained sound of someone who'd held something in for too long and was letting it out in the only moment they thought no one was watching. He should keep walking. He knew this wasn't his world. The boardrooms, the decisions that moved numbers he couldn't imagine. He was the man who emptied the trash and made sure the floors were clean before morning. But he also knew what it sounded like when someone was alone with something too heavy to carry. He knocked. The sound stopped immediately. A pause. Then, "Come in." He opened the door. Nathaniel was already standing, papers gathered, face composed in a way that would have been convincing if Jack hadn't heard what he'd heard 30 seconds earlier. "I'm sorry," Jack said. "I can come back." "No, it's fine. I was just finishing." His voice was steady, professional. "Go ahead." Jack should have nodded and started emptying the trash bins. Instead, he heard himself say, "Are you all right?" Nathaniel looked at him then, really looked, and saw the exact moment Jack decided whether to answer honestly or to give him the version of himself he showed everyone else. "No," he said quietly. "Not really." Jack set down the trash bag he'd been holding. "Do you want to talk about it?" Nathaniel laughed, a small sound without much humor in it. "I'm not sure you want to hear about hydraulic manifolds and contract deadlines." "Try me." So he did. He He told him about the press, about the engineer's report, about the $500,000 replacement and the timeline they didn't have in the contract that would disappear if they couldn't deliver. He told him all of it in the same clear, factual way he'd presented it to the board. But underneath it, Jack could hear the exhaustion, the fear he wasn't allowing himself to name. When he finished, Jack was quiet for a moment. "Can I see it?" he asked. "See what, the machine?" Nathaniel blinked. "Why? I used to work in a fabrication shop," Jack said. "Before this. It was a long time ago, but I might be able to tell you if the engineer's right." Nathaniel studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then he stood. "All right." The production floor was dark except for the emergency lighting. Their footsteps echoed across concrete as Nathaniel led him to the far end where the primary press sat silent and hulking. Jack walked around it slowly. He crouched down near the hydraulic assembly. He ran his hand along the manifold housing, feeling for something he didn't explain. "Do you have a flashlight?" he asked. Nathaniel pulled out his phone. "Turn on the light." He angled it into the gap between the manifold and the mounting bracket, looking at something specific, something small. Then he stood up. "It's not the manifold," he said. "The engineer said." "I know what he said, but look." He pointed. "See that pressure valve? The small one right there." Nathaniel leaned in. "That's a bypass relief valve. It's supposed to regulate pressure in the system. If it fails, the whole manifold reads as non-functional because the pressure can't stabilize. The engineer probably saw the system wasn't holding pressure and assumed the entire manifold was shot." Nathaniel stared at the tiny component. "So we just need to replace that, if I'm right?" "Yes." "How much does that cost?" "Last time I bought one, about $7. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites rooms. "You're telling me," Nathaniel said slowly, "that a $7 part could fix a $500,000 problem?" "I'm telling you it's possible. I need to test it to be sure." He turned to face Jack fully. "What's your name?" "Jack Miller." "Jack Miller." He repeated it like he was memorizing it. "Why are you mopping floors?" Jack smiled, a small, tired smile. "Because it pays the rent." "What happened at the fabrication shop?" "My wife got sick. I took time off to care for her. She died. By the time I was ready to work again, the shop had closed." He said it simply, without weight, the way you say things that have already taken everything they're going to take from you. "I've got a daughter. I needed something steady." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If you can fix this, I'll pay you $15,000. Jack went very still. "Sir, and I'll offer you a job, a real one, in production engineering. I don't have a degree. I don't care. If you can solve this, you've just saved my company." He met his eyes. "Do we have a deal?" Jack thought about Sophie's medication, about the field trip fee, about the careful, endless math he did every month to keep them afloat. "We have a deal." Jack called the parts supplier at 7 the next morning. The bypass relief valve was in stock. He paid for expedited shipping out of his own pocket, $23 he couldn't really spare, and had it delivered to the plant by noon. Nathaniel cleared the production floor. He told his operations manager that he was running a test and needed 2 hours without interruption. The operations manager, a skeptical man named Jeff Cortland, who'd been with the company for 9 years, looked at Jack in his maintenance uniform and said nothing, but his expression said plenty. Jack ignored it. He'd been underestimated before. He shut down the hydraulic system, relieved the pressure, and removed the failed valve. Came out easily once he'd found the right angle. The new valve went in the same way. He reconnected the pressure line, checked the seals, and stepped back. "Try it," he said. Nathaniel powered up the system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the press hummed to life, smooth and even, the hydraulic pressure stabilizing exactly where it was supposed to. Jeff Cortland stared at the readout like it had personally offended him. Nathaniel turned to Jack. His face was very calm, but his hands were shaking slightly. "It works," he said. "It works," Jack confirmed. Nathaniel walked over to Jeff. "Cancel the order for the replacement system and get a contract ready for Mr. Miller. He's joining the engineering team." Jeff opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Jack with a reassessment happening in real time. "Yes, sir," he said. The $15,000 check cleared 3 days later. Jack stood in the bank, staring at his account balance on the ATM screen, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not relief exactly. Hope. He paid off Sophie's medical bills. He bought her new shoes, the kind that fit properly. He took her to the diner on Maple Street and let her order pancakes with whipped cream and strawberries. And when she asked why they were celebrating, he told her the truth. "Things are going to be better now." She looked at him with those serious, perceptive eyes. "Promise, promise." 6 months later, Jack was lead engineer on the Meridian contract production line. The contract had been delivered on time. Bishop Manufacturing had landed 2 more clients off the back of that success. The company was growing, and Jack's fingerprints were all over the systems that made it possible. Nathaniel stopped by his workstation one afternoon. He was carrying 2 coffees and a look that meant he wanted to talk about something that wasn't on the schedule. "I've been thinking," he said, handing him one of the coffees, "about what you said that night about working in fabrication before. Okay, you were good at it." "I was." "Why didn't you go back after?" He hesitated. "After your wife." Jack was quiet for a moment, looking at the machine in front of him, the one he'd rebuilt from the ground up over the past 4 months. "Because I didn't think anyone would take a chance on me," he said. "I had a gap in my resume. I had a kid who needed me. I thought the safe choice was to take whatever work I could get and be grateful for it." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I almost made a $500,000 mistake because I listened to someone with credentials instead of looking at the problem myself." He met his eyes. "I won't make that mistake again." "Good." He smiled. "Sophie is doing well." "She is. The new medications helping. She made the soccer team. That's wonderful. They stood there for a moment. Two people who'd found each other by accident in a hallway neither of them was supposed to be in, and built something neither of them had expected. Thank you, Nathaniel said, for knocking on the door that night. Thank you for opening it. 3 years later, Jack Miller was VP of Operations at Bishop Manufacturing. Sophie was 10, healthy, thriving in school, and had recently informed him that she wanted to be an engineer when she grew up, which made him quietly cry in the car on the way home. The company had grown. Nathaniel had expanded into 2 new states. The Meridian contract had turned into a partnership that reshaped the entire sector. And in the main lobby, between the reception desk and the elevator, there was a small framed photograph, a hydraulic bypass relief valve mounted on black velvet with a brass plaque underneath. It read, "The right answer isn't always the expensive one." People asked about it sometimes. New employees, visiting clients, journalists doing profiles on Nathaniel Bishop's unexpected turnaround. Nathaniel always smiled when they asked, and then he'd tell them the story of the night his company almost died, and the man who saved it with a $7 part and the willingness to see what everyone else had missed. Some problems, he'd say, aren't solved with money. They're solved with people who refuse to walk past a closed door when they hear someone on the other side who needs help. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those people change everything.